I believe councillors have the presentation on their laptops. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's great.
There's some slight, pardon me, there's some slight revisions.
Eric, would you be able to just move the microphone over a bit and it'll pick up on the presentation?
Okay, thank you. Does that work?
I think that's better. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Lawn. I am the lead engineer for the detailed design of the Crescent Lake Causeway. With me also today is Philippe Tabich from our office, and he's a structural engineer on the project as well. So together we will be giving this presentation. We have the presentation that you have on your laptops. We also have a video presentation, so I'll probably turn the screen so council can see that when we get to that point. So today I will be talking about the roundabout geometry, refinement since the preliminary design, and some comments on safety. We'll also be talking about the construction staging, truck movements, structural design, the landscape architecture, roadway and pathway signage, cost estimate, and lastly, we'll be giving you a video presentation of what it is proposed to look like. So the roundabout geometry and refinements to the preliminary design. So since the functional and preliminary design, we've made some changes. Primarily, they were to improve truck movements through the roundabouts. So the roundabouts have been made larger. That facilitates truck movements, and it also meets current transportation guidelines, which had changed since the preliminary design. The roundabouts have also been moved to the east, both the north and south roundabouts. Those further assist with vehicle traffic, in particular with the trucks going through. The roundabouts have had there's many things about the roundabouts that improve safety at these intersections, so I'm going to describe some of those. So one of the things that happens is roundabouts reduce what we call conflict points. So conflict points being where vehicles can run into vehicles and where vehicles can have accidents with pedestrians. A typical regular four-way intersection, with whether it's signalized or stop signs, has 32 conflict points between vehicles. A roundabout has 8 conflict points between vehicles. So there's actually a substantial improvement in safety. And these roundabouts with some additional turn lanes are a little bit more complex. So there are more conflict points with these, but proportionately the conflict points on a signalized intersection here goes up as well because of all the different movements that we're accommodating. Another major improvement for safety with the roundabouts is a reduction in vehicle speed. So there's a natural reduction in vehicle speed as vehicles are entering the roundabouts. And one of the things that does is it reduces the severity of collisions. The other thing that the roundabout does, though, is combined with that reduced speed, is you're eliminating collisions on 90-degree collisions and also on left turn movements. That's obviously substantial, but also because when you have stop signs or traffic signals, those collisions can occur from a vehicle that doesn't have the right-of-way going through at full speed and hitting a vehicle or having a collision with a vehicle going the other direction that has the right-of-way. So the third component of that is what we call a reduction in deflection angle. So that is simply if a collision does occur, those vehicles are more of a side swipe coming together as opposed to a 90-degree collision, and it's also reduced speed at that shallower angle. So that's a bit of a summary on some of the safety improvements. So on to the construction staging. So stage 1 in 2019, the first step is to move the guardrail that is over the existing causeway towards the middle of the causeway. and to relocate the pedestrian walkway to be on the west side, which is further away from the actual construction activity. Stage 2 in 2019 includes turning the existing causeway into a temporary detour. So that's now having 2 lanes of traffic and your pedestrians on there. And that allows us to proceed into construction of the new causeway. So the new causeway is to the east, and that consists of various rock fill and earth fill quantities being placed. One of the keys with the design is that because of the anticipated issues with settlement and consolidation of the soils, and that's not just the soil we're placing, but it's the soil underneath in Crescent Lake, which is very poor. We have the installation of drains in the soil, which assist with that. So those drains, combined with a year of consolidation, minimizes future maintenance and issues with both the roundabouts and the roadway over the causeway. One thing to point out is that the existing causeway has performed well, but it's a little bit misleading to say we don't need to go to the expense of all these drains and the engineering of the new causeway. The existing causeway is gravel, so you don't see some of the settlement and the movements that happen. But if you look at the lamppost crossing it, it's actually fairly evident that there's quite a bit of soil movement. That's something that we definitely want to avoid on new construction where we're investing a lot of money. Stage 3 in construction, you can see that we're constructing approximately 80% of the roundabouts and the entire causeway at that time. One of the benefits of having moved the roundabouts to the east in the detailed design is that we are facilitating movement through the existing intersections better for the staged construction. In the final stage, now the roundabouts and causeway would be open to use, and now we're constructing the west portions of both the north and south roundabouts and finishing off the pedestrian and cycling pathway over the structure. So there are various closures potentially during this work. That needs to be completely determined, and of course that will impact movements through during construction, including the truck movements. So we will be talking to the trucking industry to confirm that what our potential closures are going to work well. So the north-south truck movements, I mentioned earlier that one of the improvements in the detailed design is to make those movements work better. So the north-south truck movements, you can see vehicles can move fairly easily through both the north and south roundabouts. In particular, the east movement improved the truck movements through the north roundabout. It did move further east, so you can see there's a bit of a skew of the causeway across the lake, but that's not something that's really noticeable at ground level. One thing to point out is that there's an inner apron on those roundabouts. Large trucks do have to cross over those aprons. They have about a 3-inch or 75-millimeter curb. It's not a big deal for trucks to drive over those at slow speed. Vehicles would be taking the regular paved road, and there's an inner structure that's also concrete underneath, but paving stones, which allows those trucks to go through. Another feature of these roundabouts is these truck movements have been run with the largest highway trucks that we would get. They're larger than the existing vehicles that Mayfair Farms use, so it allows for ease of movement for them, but also future expansion if larger vehicles have to go through. Of course, Mayfair Farms aren't the only trucks to use to go to the island. There's also vehicles for fairs and things such as that. This slide shows the east-west movements. Again, the trucks can get through there relatively easily. They do cross over the aprons. That's part of the design. And we're showing just the east-west here. We haven't shown all of the movements, but trucks can drive through the roundabouts in various directions. We just haven't shown them for clarity. It's very confusing when you show all of that on these drawings at the same time. So for the structural design, the initial the low-level crossing that we had in the preliminary design had a single small culvert. That was in comparison to the high-level crossing, which had the 3 arches and was designed for skaters and snowmobiles and such to go through. Because that high-level design was a $10 million project, Council had chosen to go with the less expensive $6 million low-level crossing. However, what we've done in the detailed design is added 3 culverts. So there's a 2.7 meter culvert in the middle and 2 2.4 meter culverts on either side. There's a precast wall. Those are made of large concrete blocks. And at normal summer water levels, what we've created is what looks like a 3-arch structure. So it has a lot of the visual appeal of the high-level crossing. It's just not designed for canoes or skaters and such vehicles to go through. So I'll talk about the costs later on. The various changes to the low-level crossing have increased the design, but it's still overall fairly economical. And this is definitely very economical for when you consider the aesthetics and regaining the look of what we had before. So this is a plan view of the landscape architecture. So a few features to point out. So there's, you can see the apron of the roundabouts. Those are the sort of beige colored or yellow colored sort of a limestone color pavers. You've got plantings, so trees and perennials and shrubs, not only in the park-like space along the causeway, but also in the interior of the roundabouts. You can see there's the one southbound lane going to the island, 2 northbound lanes coming out. That improves traffic flow, in particular when there's a lot of traffic leaving over major events. There's a snowmobile crossing shown on the north side and a cross-country skier crossing shown on the left side. At those locations, the curb would be dropped down so that they can easily cross the road. And one of the benefits of moving the roundabouts to the east was to create more of a park-like space. And on the southwest, we have a picnic area that has been added to the project. And further southwest along the lakeshore, we have a rest area for skaters and cross-country skiers and a bit of a wall for shelter from wind. So that's a few of the landscape features. With respect to the structure, a couple things that we've proposed is to have a limestone color on the concrete blocks. So the idea with the concrete blocks have a texture and a color similar to the limestone that City Hall is made of. Ties things together a bit. The pedestrian handrail would be a black painted handrail, and that handrail would match the black lampposts that we would have for the street lighting, as well as for the pedestrian lighting along the pedestrian walkways. And there's concrete capstone that goes across the top, as well as concrete on those arches. So a few other aesthetic things. There could be lighting put in, like spotlights on the structure to highlight it at night. There could also be holiday lighting that could be run along the top edge of the culvert and over the arches. So there's a few things that can be done to reincorporate holiday lighting into the structure. So this is what a cross-section of the causeway would look like. So to the right, the lower section is what was the temporary or the current causeway. It was supposed to be temporary, but hasn't been. So that's where you see some park benches and where that picnic area would be. To the left, you see the 3 lanes of vehicle traffic, and you see the sidewalk or the walkway, which is for both cyclists and pedestrians. That walkway is fairly close to the road when you're going over the structure, but it moves away when you're off the structure. And you can see the lighting, and then the street light post can also be used for banners, or it could also be used to erect holiday lighting. So this is an image with the roadway and path signs. So this is zooming in on the south roundabout. I'm not going to go through all the signs in detail, but a couple of things to point out is that we have the, so again, this is the south roundabout. So there's the walkway crossing on the west side. That's at the top of the screen. And then the other one on the south side. One thing to point out is that we've eliminated pedestrian crossings on the north side, and that's so that the roundabout functions as well as possible when vehicles are leaving the island, because we don't want those vehicles stuck in the roundabout. So we don't want pedestrians crossing there, and we also have the walkway on the west side to promote and to keep pedestrians on one side crossing the causeway. This is the roundabout on the north side. A couple of things to point out there. Again, you've got pedestrian crossings in 3 locations. We don't have them on the east side, and that's for safety reasons. There will be a lot of vehicles turning right and coming through the roundabout after a major event, and we don't want those vehicles who are trying to merge with other traffic having to also worry about pedestrians. So eliminating pedestrian crossings there improves safety, and again, it'll also improve the vehicle movement because those vehicles aren't stopped waiting for pedestrians. One thing to note as well is there's islands like concrete islands or small boulevards that are several meters wide for all of the pedestrian crossings. What that allows is when a pedestrian gets halfway across, if they choose to, they can stop and they can wait for traffic if they're not comfortable to cross. I mean, they do have the right of way, but they're not going to get stranded in the middle of traffic going in either direction. So a summary of costs and a comparison to the preliminary design. So I did mention that costs were increased, and so the roadway costs for the increased roundabouts was about $400,000. The increase in the structure to regain the aesthetics of the high-level crossing was about $230,000. There was about $100,000 additional for the municipal works, and that's simply because in detailed design, the design went further along, so the cost estimate's more accurate. That's approximately $725,000. When you include contingency, that's getting close to about $1 million difference. So we're looking at approximately $7 million for the low-level crossing instead of the $6 million that we had in preliminary design. There's also a 20% contingency on there, and so that number could come down depending on the contractors and the bidders and how they see the work. The line for inflation there, what that's considering is that we're a couple of years, 1 or 2 years later than the preliminary design, but because of the staging, the construction also takes a couple of years, so there's an allowance for inflation there. So now we're going to show you a video presentation.
True, just a bit maybe.
I can't see it at all.
Okay. Why did I lose this issue?
I think you can stand it.
Maybe. This chair.
Library,
Yeah, it's still plugged in. It's just
It's the wrong signal, and each HDMI signal is not going to pick up a lot. Source. There we go.
okay. Now, hopefully. Okay.
We're going to start at Crescent Road, traveling west. You can can see the dedicated right turn lane to Royal Road. You can see also the raised concrete islands there for safety. Getting to the north roundabout, you can see the path on the west side. Now getting to the causeway, we have one southbound lane and two northbound. You can see the handrail, the black handrail, the picnic area on the right. That's around 6 by 15 meters long. Now the south roundabout on the right, you're going to see the rest area for the skis and the skaters in the wintertime. That's Royal Road. That's Georgia Hill Drive. And you can see the pavers at the roundabout. We're still finalizing the color and exactly how it would be. But just looking from the water now, you can see the structure and the color of the walls trying to be similar to the City Hall, with the black handrail, the light posts black, the pedestrian lights. Now just showing a little bit more of an overview of the north roundabout. So the interior of that, we're still finalizing the architectural design, but that's roughly what would look like. And then just zooming in to show the overall site. So you see the picnic area at the west side there, the wall at the very south side for the protection of the wind.
So you want to see that again? Good? Yeah, we can run that again quickly if people just want to. So actually what we'll do is we'll just let it run. So that's the formal part of the presentation. If there's any questions.
So there are questions from council? There are questions from council? Council Buds?
Slide 6 of 19. Just going back to just understanding construction. We're going to be under construction for a long period of time, so I just want to have a full understanding about traffic flow during that period of time.
Yeah.
So 6 and 7, at least that's on my.
Yeah. So during construction, so there's a possibility that we could end up closing Royal Road south just for convenience. It might just be easier and give the contractors a little bit more space to work. If that was the case, then all the traffic would have to go down Tupper during construction. And if we go back,
But
now,
can I just ask a question? So I understand that part, but we enter onto the island now, and are we taking all traffic to the west? I don't see any traffic that can actually go east at that point in time.
yeah, so what's on your laptop doesn't have, so we've shown a little temporary connection here.
Oh, you're right, that's not there.
So, so basically what that would do is potentially allow vehicles to cut back and around. It is a private road going to the west, so I think there's a couple of issues. There's trucks going in and there's vehicles. That little detour road there is a little bit tight for trucks to get through. Or
Like as you drive on there now, you're going to be kind of gearing towards going to the golf course,
right.
and also into Stride Place, where there's kind of a horseshoe at the front of Stride Place. But so that little kind of cutback will take traffic back onto our island then, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the intention. Though there's some issues with that simply because it's fairly tight, and if you've got truck movements in two directions through there, there's some work to be done to solve
Okay.
that. The other thing is, I mean, you can see there's a tree right there. It's a substantial tree. It's not, I wouldn't say it's overly healthy, but it's still a fairly large tree. The other one that's right to the left here, like, is just a little 2-inch trunk. That's a hydro pole right there. So potentially you could relocate the hydro pole. That's expensive versus cutting down a tree. You don't usually like to cut down a tree for a temporary situation, but so the details of that need to be sorted out. Trucks going into PCU or onto the island for a fair, I mean, they can go into here and they can take this loop into the PCU lot, but you're not going to want to send all the truck traffic through PCU.
Yeah, they can keep going west as well.
So, yeah, so there's some either negotiation with the private landowner or other geometric considerations required to make the south end work. Yeah. Just a couple other details. So on the previous slide, we've added a few stop signs. So potentially, from a safety perspective, because it's not great, these don't line up that good right now. So we could just make it a stop sign for north-south on the Causeway and Royal Road South, have a 3-way stop at Tupper. And again, the idea is that most traffic's coming through Tupper. This is the east-west is through traffic. And then because it's a little bit hard to run a 4-way stop when you have an offset intersection. So again, the details of that are need to be worked out. And it may just simplify it, like I said, to close Royal Road South and come down Tupper. You know, in the next stage, once you are constructing the roundabout, you're not going through east-west here anyway. So, and right here, you really have a right turn and sort of then a quick turn onto the Causeway. So it may just be easier to just close that. And it'll make the people on Tupper appreciate the roundabouts that the trucks can get through. So, any other questions on the staging?
We have a number of large events coming up during the approximate year and a half in construction, would you say?
Yes. Yeah.
Including the spring of 2020 is the Junior Hockey Championships, National Championships going to be held here. So will we have the ability to accommodate all that traffic?
Yes, it will be a 2-lane causeway, which is the same as the 2-lane bridge now. The truck traffic is going on the causeway right now. Anyway, I guess the one difference is in major events right now, you have a certain portion of traffic that uses the causeway. Most of the people are using the bridge, but a percentage are on the causeway. So we will have less capacity than you do now, simply because people kind of cheat and use the causeway as well. So traffic won't move as smoothly during construction because we have kind of, right now we sort of have 2-lane bridge and a 1-lane/2-lane causeway, with most people using the bridge. So geometrically, we need just to make sure that all the vehicle movements can happen. But yes, there is a bit of a reduction in capacity because we only have the 2-lane causeway then. But those lanes are, the roadway and the causeway will be made wider for this temporary situation. So you're not talking as narrow a causeway as it is right now, which is a little bit difficult for vehicles to pass and not ideal. Because we need to safely get 2 lanes of traffic and pedestrians over the existing causeway.
Other questions from council?
Once that field's put in, we may use that field area access briefly.
Which one was that?
We should just rent a bridge. So you can't do that. Roger does that.
Okay, sorry, what was this?
So once that fill is placed there might be an opportunity to utilize that in the winter
Oh, yeah, okay. So basically this, the whole fill area, when this is filled in, and we actually fill right through the causeway, because we need all the soil, not right through where the culvert will be. Because we have to fill the whole area to get all of that soil to settle. So that area will simply be an open space with, an earth fill embankment. So not that we want to create a second roadway on there, but there is some space that, I guess potentially you could either modify the intersection here at the end a little bit. This I think works fairly well because when this turns, it turns into Roller Road South fairly well. Of course, this is a little bit tighter, so there could be an opportunity to come across here in a temporary situation and improve the geometry there for the number of months when we're waiting for that consolidation to happen. So when the culvert is actually constructed, then that center portion gets dug out. Because of the proximity of the culvert to the roadway, we will need some temporary shoring in there because they are still fairly close. So that's a cost that wasn't specifically highlighted in the preliminary design because it depended on the proximity, but that's still within the accuracy of our estimate. Different contractors will have different ways of dealing with that as well. So that's the kind of thing where we tell the contractor temporary shoring is required, but he's going to come up with his most economical way of doing that. Any other questions?
Well, I have another one. A question about the cost of roundabouts. So last fall, late fall, we'd asked for an opinion. It was just a ballpark figure on what's the cost of roundabouts. And the number we heard was $400,000 per roundabout. And subsequently that, I got information saying that they add about $250,000 compared to a conventional intersection, but they're $250,000 less expensive than traffic lights. So there's been no traffic lights factored in here. Does that sound right to you?
So when we were talking about $250,000 for the roundabouts, that estimate included the surface works. So it didn't include the additional fill that's required because the roundabout extends into the lake a little bit. It also didn't include the landscaping that was in the center of the roundabout. So the $250,000 total for the roundabouts was a bit low.
Okay.
Because it was basically the transportation traffic roadway design portion of it. So if that, I don't want to just throw numbers out, that number would probably be a bit higher. And we were saying that signals at each intersection would be $250,000 per intersection. So in the fall when we were talking, we had about a $250,000 increase if you were going to do traffic signals versus roundabouts. So that gap is probably a bit tighter. And if you now have a gap between those two of $100,000, I mean that gets into the accuracy of the estimate when you're looking at a $7 million project. So it's probably safe to say that the costs are similar, but the real savings on roundabouts to traffic like signalized intersections is your life cycle costs. So depending on the configuration, certain roundabouts can be more than traffic signals, some can be less. But in the life cycle, lifetime costs includes the cost of accidents. And when you include the cost of accidents, there's about a 10 times increase in cost for signalized intersections over roundabouts. So life cycle costing, including accidents, there's actually a big difference. For all intents and purposes, within this estimate, they're pretty close. The important thing, though, to note is that if you do the $6 million of construction or $7 million and you don't have roundabouts or signalized intersections, then you've spent all of that money and you have very little improvement in traffic flow. So the last thing you would want to do is spend all this money and have four-way stops at the ends because you've gained very little. From a safety perspective, roundabouts are definitely safer. from a life cycle cost perspective, roundabouts are less expensive. So some of that is new information from the last time we talked. So
Okay.
if there's any more questions, let us know.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Councillor Knox.
Can I just ask why the increase with the accidents in the, like, with the lights?
So there's a number of reasons for the increase in cost. One of them, the increase in accidents. One of them is because in a roundabout, all the vehicles are essentially traveling in the same direction. Because you're traveling in the same direction, you're all going counterclockwise. The conflict points are when you come in, there's a converging conflict point, and when you're leaving, there's a diverging conflict point. So that's literally the 8 conflict points. If you look at a signalized intersection, one vehicle turning right, going straight, or turning left can have an accident with someone coming from the left. That's 3 traffic movements from this guy and 1 from that guy. You take now him having 3 movements and intersecting with this person and that person and that person. That's how you actually get to 32 conflict points in a signalized intersection. So there's a lot more conflict points, but then the severity of the accidents are a lot worse in a signalized intersection. And the worst of which being when someone outright misses a red light at high speed and you have a 90-degree collision. So that's where so you have less accidents with the roundabouts, but then the cost of those accidents over the lifespan of the intersection are considerably less. And then the other thing is the actual injury collisions. I don't think Canada has specifically kept statistics, but in several countries, including the US, Australia, and France, where they've kept the statistics, there's anywhere from a 45 to 78% decrease in collisions causing injuries between roundabouts and intersections, like regular 4-way intersections.
Thank you.
Councillor Wall.
Yes, Your Worship. I was wondering, Eric, is there a difference in pedestrian safety between the traffic signals and the roundabouts?
Yes, there's also, similarly, there's a reduction in conflict points for pedestrians. And again, it's similar to the vehicles. If a pedestrian is crossing here, when they're getting on the way to that first island, there's only vehicles turning right that they can have a pedestrian vehicle collision with. When they're on the second leg of that island, there's only vehicles coming out that they can have a collision with. When they're crossing a regular 4-way intersection, they're straight this way, right, left. Like there's many points where they can have a collision. So in fact, the pedestrian vehicle incidents are reduced as well.
Thank you.
We did discuss last time that I was here that the other thing is those pedestrian crossings are set back so that a vehicle leaving the intersection is now focused on the road they're on, and they have room to stop if a pedestrian is crossing in front of them. So that, because when they're in the roundabout, they're focused on the roundabout. And if the pedestrian crossing is too close, they're still looking at cars and where am I going? This gives them a chance to stop. The islands in between gives the pedestrians a choice to not step out if they don't want to and not be stranded. So there's 2 things that help pedestrians in a roundabout.
Well, Councillor Draycott.
Thank you. Eric, I just had a question in terms of what this looks like for our community. I know that there's been some resistance to roundabouts, and a lot of people that I've talked to have had hesitations because of education, I believe. What is the suggestion for our community going forward when it comes to educating our community as to how to utilize a roundabout, both as a pedestrian and as a vehicle?
So the suggestion was to create pamphlets that can be distributed so basically describing roundabouts and how they work from both a pedestrian and a vehicle standpoint. In the city of Winnipeg, they actually put articles in the Winnipeg Free Press, which had like diagrams and told people how to drive through them. So basically, public awareness and information like that could be put, on the City of Portage website as well. So there's a number of ways to get that information out.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions from council? Okay, well, hearing none, thank you very much for your presentation, Eric, and appreciate you coming out.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to come.